Good morning. So, we're going to talk about the most important thing that every single human being on this earth must know, and that is their value. And we're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. And then we're going to give an example of how well Jesus knew his value. Now, before that, in chapter 3, about a couple verses earlier, Jesus Christ was baptized by John the Baptist. And when he came out of the water, the scripture says that heaven opened up and the Spirit descended upon Jesus like a dove. And a voice came from heaven and said, "This is my son, and I'm proud of him." So God sealed Jesus Christ at that moment with his value. And once Jesus Christ was sealed with his value, then he knew his value. Then God knew, as well as Jesus, it doesn't matter what circumstances I'm in, I'm going to triumph because I know my value. Now let's look what happened first. Now, so immediately after the greatest praise was sent to him, because when God said, "This is my son who I'm well pleased," he was saying it to Satan, he was saying it to the world, he was saying it to everyone, that this is my son and I am proud of him. So as a parent, that is the first thing we have to do to our children. Our job is to encourage our children. Your job is to encourage your spouse, to always let them know that I am very pleased. And the reason why that is important, because every single day, your child, your spouse, and your spouse can be either the wife or the husband, they go out into a world that's trying to devalue them. So let's look at what happened. So in verse 1, after he was led up into the wilderness to be tempted by God, and they say the devil came to him and he had fasted for 40 days and he was hungry. So let's notice that. Now, after he went into the wilderness, he had fasted for 40 days and he was hungry. So that means that he was compromised. The conditions were not ideal. Sometimes you're compromised. Sometimes the conditions are not ideal for you. Could be your work, could be your circumstances. It could be a number of things. And when your conditions are not great and when they are compromised, that is when Satan is coming to attack you. I promise you. So let's look at how Jesus handled it. So he said, the tempter came and said, "If you are the Son of God." So that was the first attempt at devaluation. I know you're compromised. Now I'm going to use this word called if. Because when you use the word if creates doubt. You have to remember, when you hear a person say the word if is saying it's not certain, there is a compromise. So he said this, he says, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to be bread because I know you're hungry." And here's how Jesus answered him. He said, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." So he's saying man is not ruled by his circumstances. Man should not be ruled or not be controlled by the physical, but he should be controlled by the mental. So that he couldn't devalue him that way. The second thing he did is he took him up to the holy city, and the devil sat on the pinnacle of the holy city. So that tells you that if he took him there and he sat on the pinnacle of it, that he is the God of this world, right? And he said to Jesus, he said, if you be the Son of Man, he said to throw yourself down off this temple. Because he said, there's a scripture who was saying the angels will come down and lift thee up, lest ye cast your foot on the stone, right? So now Jesus says, it is written, you should not tempt the Lord. So again, Jesus knew who he was, and Jesus knew who God was. And Jesus said, I'm strong within my faith and I'm strong within myself. I'm not going to yield to you by breaking God's command. So that didn't work. Then he said, Then he said, and the devil took him up to an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world. So if he took him up to the mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world, then who is in charge of all the kingdoms of the world? It is Satan. He's in charge. And he said to Jesus, all these things I will give to you if you fall down and worship me. That's it. So you have to remember, Satan wants your worship. And the way I get you to worship me is I must devalue you as a person. Because if I devalue you, you will always see me as valuable. And if you see me as valuable, then I can have your worship, right? Now listen what Jesus said to him. He says, Satan, it is written, thou shalt not worship the Lord. Thou shalt not worship the Lord. Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and only him you shall serve. So he's saying, I am going to worship God. And the only person I'm going to serve is God. So now that's how Jesus handled it. Now let's talk about what's happening in the world today, bring it into current terms. We have this thing called the Great Resignation that's going on with people, where people are not going to work. It's not that we don't have jobs. It's just that people are reassigning their value. Long years ago, we had people living substandard, making under $10 an hour. And you ask yourself the question, how will you survive in a world today where you're making $10 an hour? So people are saying, I'm going to assess my value, and I'm going to do other things because my value is higher than $10 an hour. And you must really understand that it is not the company's job or the organization's job to assess you and praise you and give you the high value. It is God's and yours alone, and it's your family and it's your parents. Because just like how Satan is, corporations are going to be the same way. They're going to try to assign the least value to you so they can be profitable. And now I can tell you the world is just rejecting that. Because right now they're saying, I'm not going to get up and work for a job where I'm making $10 an hour. They're just not doing it. Now, before we did because we devalued ourselves. But right now you have a generation of people right now who is just determined, and they're redefining what their value is. They're redefining how they're going to give their service. Because at the end of the day, we give service. We give service and we assign service. So you're on this giving and you're on this assignment. You have to remember the corporation's job is to assign the lowest that they can to you. Now, if you accept that assignment, it's not the corporation's fault, it's your fault. And that's why the most important thing that you must know and understand is your value. Now, one thing I will say with this, God did never meant for a person not to work, because he said if a person does not work, a person should not eat. But here's what we should do. Understand our values. Fast, go through a fast and just ask God to assess you, because every single person has a unique value because we were created in God's image and his own likeness. And God does not create junk. But I can tell you what the devil's job is to do is to devalue you and make sure you think you're trash. What the corporation's job is to do is devalue you and make sure you give your service to them at the lowest cost possible for them to make a profit. So what I would say more than anything else in the world, really focus and ask God, what is your value? And once you know your value, you will never take a lesser assignment from anyone. And the same thing with the women and the little girls out there today. You live in a world where you are constantly actually put on an assembly line to actually show your value. and you are doing all kinds of things to make people see you as more valuable, putting on makeup, putting on all these things to make sure you're valued. But remember, your value is not the external, your value is the internal. So work on the internal, work on the mind, because that is the greatest value. Have a wonderful Sunday.